Welcome to April in Canada, where it is hailing and snowing, and it's nearly the end, but we're not too late to go over the first quarter goals. I want to do a quick video where I kind of go over the goals that I gave at the beginning of the year and how I'm doing them. The areas that I specifically wanted to highlight, I did a group of 7, I probably should have counted before this, where I kind of look at these areas that I particularly want to focus on throughout the year. I will be honest that even though this went fairly well, I had an unusual set of the first 3 months. It was a very, very difficult time in my life between visiting people for mental health and my grandfather passing away and me getting COVID and my semester. It was just a mess of a time, and it's not really what I want to highlight in my reading. I only read 28 books in the first 3 months, which is incredibly low. I've gauged on the 150 to 200 book a year kind of range, which is normally more like 20 books a month rather than 20 books in 3 months. So even though I didn't accomplish all of these, I do think that after a little bit of a reset, being able to take some time to grieve, take some time to help my mental health and my physical health, I will be able to read more. So that's what I'm hoping, but I want to go over these still and talk about the ways where I succeeded and the ways that I failed. I don't know if I do the tally first or I do the individual months first. I think I'm going to go through the individual months and we'll keep the intrigue and mystery alive. So the first area that I really wanted to focus on was Indigenous books, and I read A Snake Falls to Earth, and it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I'm not probably going to go over every book that I read in this, but I really thought that book was special and amazing, and I really liked it. The next one is a 20th century classic. I did read a 20th century classic here, and then a pre-1900s classic. I read one as well, and a collection of poetry. I also succeeded in reading the kind of too thick but also really great Call Us What You Carry by Amanda Gorman. I really enjoyed that. And then a Latinx author, and in this I began one and failed because of this end of January things would start to spiral a little bit. I finished about half of it before the end of the 31st, and then I finished the rest in February. So it kind of is a shared 1 point between 2 months kind of thing. The Gods of Jade and Shadow was a book that I really liked. I really enjoyed the characters, and I'm really excited to read more Sylvia Marina Garcia because I really like the way that she writes. And then we have a play or a short story. This is, spoiler alert, the one that I succeeded in every single month, and I am shocked. I think that because I'm being really stressed, reading something that's more accessible, that's short, that I can really engage with has been really helpful. I believe that the short story that I am counting here is also the one for the 20th century classics, which is The Tale Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket, which has additionally become a favorite. Like, January was pretty good on favorites. And then we have a history book, and I did not succeed. I had these grand plans that I was going to read a bunch of history because I read a lot of memoirs, I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of essays and stuff like that, but I don't read a ton of like biography or just like plain history without a narrative. And I thought that this would be really interesting to incorporate into my reading, and it did not happen in any of these months because of the fact that this was not the time when I was like, you know, trench deep in school and all of the other things that I felt like reading like a thick history book. But hopefully I'll be able to remedy that if I end up falling off on this goal in this year. I understand that it's maybe just not the year that it was going to succeed. The last goal on here for the month and for all of the months is Never Let Me Go, which is an own book, and I succeeded in finishing it this month, and I want to read more of my physical TBR because despite the fact that I have a large collection of books, I read from the library much more, which I love reading from the library, but I also want to read and prioritize books on my shelves. So now we move on to February, and we do not have an Indigenous book that I read this month. We do not have a 20th century classic book that I read, but I did read a pre-1900s classic. I believe this was Lady Windermere's Fan, which I really enjoyed and had such a great time with. And then I kind of read a poetry. It's hard to characterize. So I read Not All the Bright Has Burned, and this is a beautiful graphic novel, mixed media kind of art story by Jason Reynolds. And Jason, who is also something Jason, they have been friends since college, and they wrote this about COVID, and they collaborated with each other, and it was super good, and I really enjoyed the stories, and Jason Reynolds writes in verse throughout it. So it is a novel in verse, but also it's not primarily poetry. And then I read a Latinx novel because I finished Gods of Jade and Shadow, and I read a play and short story, and I did not read a history book, but I kind of did. See, this is the murkiness, because if we count memoirs, especially John Lewis's March, which is very detailed and which is about a historical figure, then this is history. But I don't know if I was necessarily going toward this history because I do read plenty of memoirs in general. If I was counting memoirs, I believe I read memoirs each month this time, so that would count. But yeah, I read March, so maybe a half point on the history. And then an owned book I did not read. I was like going through and I was like, no, none of these are owned. We have March. And again, I did not read an Indigenous book. This one made me quite sad because I did want to really prioritize that. And I read so many amazing books by Indigenous authors near the end of the year. It's probably the people group that gets least represented in all media and in all fiction and stories and stuff like that. So I thought that I really wanted to prioritize that, and I'm quite disappointed myself for not. So that's something that I'm definitely going to remedy as we go into the next quarter and rest of the year. And then we have a 20th century classic. Again, I succeeded in this, and a pre-1900s classic, which I believe is like the only one that I did like almost every single time. I was like, yes, I'm reading all of this. I read Medea the play, which was really interesting. It was the perfect thing to just read in between like stress. I was like, yes, I feel your chanting. I feel all of your betrayal. It's great. I did not read a collection of poetry, but I did read a Latinx novel when I was driving. I read Violetta by Isabel Allende. I think that she's just going to be one of my favorite authors. I really love this story. Like, it is bone deep in my soul. Like, I really hold it close. Like, it was so beautiful and evocative. It follows 100 years of this woman throughout her life, beginning in the pandemic of 1919 and following all the way through until the pandemic where she dies at age 100. And it's just beautiful and evocative and looks at Chilean politics, looks at family dynamics, looks at chosen family, and I loved it so much. So that is like my huge recommendation from all of this. And then we have a play and short story. I read several throughout this month because that's what I needed to get through, and I really enjoy them. I'm really falling back in love with plays, and I'm so thankful for that. And then we did not read a history book, and we did read an owned book. We did kind of read an owned book. This is one thing, it's like, what requires an owned book? Because I did read a book that was on my shelf because it was my roommate's, and that is Opal and Neb, and ever since I've been like, I need to read this because it's there. So I did read it and it was on my shelf. But in the future, when I like move and stuff like that, it's not a book that's coming with me. So that's an interesting thing to categorize of whether that's an owned book or not. And then our tally for the first 3 months and quarter of this, I'm writing on my napkin because you know that I'm really professional in the parking lot when I'm doing that. And then we have 1 out of 3 Indigenous books, 2 out of 3 20th century classics, 3 out of 3 pre-1900s books, which I'm really happy about. Also, in some cases, I did read more than 1 book this month, but I'm not counting those because that's how I'm doing it. So I'm just counting whether I did it or not how many I did. And then we have 1.5 poetry books, 2 Latinx books, 3 out of 3 plays and short stories, 0 out of 3 / maybe a half point or 1 history, and then 2 out of 3 owned books. I'm fairly okay with this. I would have liked better, especially in regards to the Indigenous books and the history books, but especially Indigenous books, because history books, at the end of the day, if I don't read them, I don't read them. Although I feel like I should mark in March that I read a lot of history texts, just not for reading or for pleasure. One of my really good friends is a history major in her master's program, and we worked on our projects together. So I feel like I know so much about suicide in World War II in Canada, and it is something that I feel like I have now become an expert on based on writing. So if we're counting just historical context and rewriting and writing transcripts of the Second World War, I have done a lot of that in March. As I finish this semester and this very difficult period in my life, as hopefully the sun will actually come out and it will stop hailing and snowing in April, we'll be able to move forward and take some time to grieve and work on things in my life that are hurtful, but also, necessary to go through because life has pain, but also that does not eliminate the beauty in the world and how we can transform that pain into understanding and hope. So I hope that as this year continues on, that you're able to find that it is not just, whether a goal is accomplished or not, but how you interact with the world and how you feel loved and supported and involved in the people in your life. And I wish you all the best, and let me know how you felt about this beginning of the year. Is it been snowy for you? Has it been hailing a little bit? Has it been sunny and amazing and your year and like writing and reading has been going so great? I would love to hear all of it, and I will talk to you next time.